I might be in the minority, but I think Joshua Tree is a one-day park. Um,
Mm.
and I definitely think that Death Valley is a 2 to 3, maybe even 4-day park. So, I prefer Death Valley.
Oh my gosh, that's like making a real statement there. Like I've
Yeah,
never heard
I'm
so
throwing
and
it down, man.
you're throwing down a claim, Death Valley better than Joshua Tree. I love that. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the RV Atlas. We have a killer episode for you today. Back on the show is Shelly Bailey Shaw, and she's the founder of Kid Tripster, which is an online family travel resource with a dedicated outdoors section. And Shelly has written about many national parks for Kid Tripster over the years. And Shelly is the most experienced traveler I have ever met in my life. She's incredible to talk to. She has visited 61 of our 63 national parks. And this summer, she's hitting the last two. So she will have completed all 63 of our national parks. Now, after she does that, we're going to have her back on the show later this summer. But for this episode, she's going to share her five most underrated national parks in the country. And she's speaking from experience. A lot of people say, "Oh, I think this was underrated," but yet they haven't experienced that much of whatever they're talking about. When Shelly says a park is underrated, I mean, like she's been to almost all of them. So this is a terrific episode. We're going to talk about Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. We're going to talk about Death Valley in California and three others. We're going to go into detail about what she loved about those parks. We'll talk a little bit about your options for camping or RVing in those parks, if that's even possible, because there are cases here where you cannot do that, or Shelly doesn't recommend that you do that. It's a terrific episode, and we get sidetracked a bunch of different times just talking kind of like travel philosophy, national parks, what makes a great national park, tips for planning your own amazing trip like this. There is no one I would rather talk about national parks with than Shelly Bailey Shaw. She is an absolute expert. She's going to really bring some great recommendations for us for five underrated parks. And it's super timely too, because we all know that there's overcrowding at some of our major national parks like Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Zion. So here are five options that are definitely going to be a bit less crowded than some of those, maybe a lot less crowded. So let's dive in and talk to Shelly Bailey Shaw about her five most underrated national parks. But before we do so, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Yogi Bear's Jellystone Park Camp Resorts. Good morning, Shelly, and welcome back to the RV Atlas. It's good to see your face. How are you?
I'm good. It's bright and early here on the West Coast.
How is life in the Pacific Northwest? I've always been very jealous of where you live. How has your spring been?
It has been warm. I think it's going to be like 85 degrees today. We're having an unusually warm spring, which I don't think I've ever said in Oregon before. So I'll take it, even though it's probably caused by, global warming.
And you are about to accomplish, so I'm literally in awe of you guys, okay? So and it's you and your husband are about to have gone to all 63 of the national parks. You have 2 more, is that correct?
Yeah, well, technically, I'm the only one who's gonna hit
Okay.
63 because there's been a couple here and there that either my husband hasn't been with me and I've been on a trip with one of my sons. My sons and my husband are about 5 short. So they still have some places to visit, but mom is going to hit number 63 in July.
Now, are they sort of hell-bent on also accomplishing this since they're so close? I mean, do they have plans to hit the ones they need to hit?
I don't know if my husband is ever going to achieve this goal. I have hope for the kids. They have more time. But the ones they're missing, we just recently went to American Samoa, and that is a fairly expensive trip that mom and dad are not financing. So I think it's going to be later in life when they get there.
Now, how long has this been a goal? Did you just like go to a lot of national parks and then all of a sudden you were like, well, maybe we can do all of them? Or has this been like a very intentional thing for you for many, many years?
It has been, I would say, intentional. We started going to national parks when my youngest was 5 and my oldest was 8. And that first RV trip was with a rented RV, and we did 10 national parks in 3 weeks. Which I don't advise people to do. But it was the Utah loop, and then dipping down into Southern California, and then coming full circle through Northern California, and then back to Utah. But we did the first 10. We had such a fantastic time. Our national parks are such an incredible asset that I was like, you know what? Let's keep going. Let's do this. And that's when I looked up how many national parks there were, and at the time, it was fewer than 63. As you know, they've added a few since then. But yeah, we just kept at it. And once we owned our own RV, and did a couple cross country road trips, we were able to tick them off. But I don't like saying ticking them off because it sounds like we have a checklist, right? We enjoyed nearly all of them. There are a few that I don't think are worthy of the national park title, but as you and I have discussed, that's a different podcast topic.
I think I remember you talking trash about Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Am I remembering that correctly?
That is correct. But keep in mind, now that I've been to almost all 63, I have pretty like high standards for the national park. I also live in the West. And so again, my standards are pretty high. But Black Canyon of the Gunderson is a fine place. But it's not one of my favorite national parks because it's really difficult to experience. You're basically experiencing it on the rim. And it just I don't know, it didn't excite me. It didn't have the drop dead gorgeous scenery that some of our other parks have. It can be difficult for folks to get to. It's in Colorado, but a rather remote area of Colorado. So it's not one of my favorites.
So tell us exactly what's left this summer. Like, what's the plan to complete this?
So I'm very excited about these last two parks. Definitely the most remote of the 63. They're Gates of the Arctic and Kupuk Valley, which are in the far reaches of Alaska. No roads, no trails, no cell service.
And flying into Anchorage and going from there, is that the basic plan?
Yeah, we fly into Anchorage and then fly to an Inuit village where we stay overnight. And then the next morning, we get on a bush plane with a guide, and we are flown to Gates of the Arctic, dropped, see you in 2 days. And then they come back, pick you up, drop you in Kubuk Valley, see you in another 2 days. And then that's how you do it. These parks are very difficult to get to. And we've had to have this reservation with this outfitter for 2 years because the visit window, weather wise, is so short. So we've been looking forward to this for a long time. Having been RV owners for decades, we are not backcountry campers, but we are backcountry camping. There are tents involved, much to my husband's chagrin, but he's going to manage. It'll be fine. It'll be an adventure.
Adventure is the word. This makes Yellowstone sound like Disney World. Like, this
Oh,
makes, like,
yeah.
Yellowstone or Glacier sound like easy and not adventurous at all. So after you complete the 63, we'll definitely have you back, and there's a hundred different things we could talk about, but we'll maybe talk about some of the national parks you cannot go to by RV, kind of flip the script a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to.
Awesome. So today's topic, we're talking about, I believe, five underrated national parks, and you believe that these people know what some of them are, but they're not those bucket list national parks necessarily
Right.
for people. And as so many people got interested in national parks during the pandemic, it seems like they all wanted to go to the same five national parks, like Yellowstone,
Hmm.
Yosemite, Zion, maybe Glacier, Grand Teton. So I love doing this type of topic where it's like, hey, there's a lot of other great options out there. So why don't we dive in? All right. So your first underrated national park, and you are speaking from a world of experience. When you say most underrated, you're not just basing that on the 10 or 20 you visited. You're basing that on just about all of them. Tell us about Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado and why you think it's underrated.
Well, I would say this park ranks as one of our favorites because it was just really fun for the kids. I mean, this park boasts several different ecosystems. There's grasslands, wetlands, aspen forest, tundra, but it's this 30 square mile dune field that's really the big draw here. And you want to start your day here early because by the afternoon, that sand temperature is reaching like 150 degrees, depending on the time of year. So here I recommend hiking to High Dune at sunrise, or certainly no later than 7:30 in the morning. Afterwards, it's time for some fun. You can choose from sandboarding or sand sledding. There's a store just on the outside of the park that rents the boards and the sleds that are specially designed for sand. And trust me, snow sleds, pieces of cardboard, those round saucers, they don't work on sand. We've tried it, doesn't work. So go ahead and rent those. After an hour or so, you'll be absolutely exhausted because you'll have been climbing up and down these sand dunes. And that's the time that you head to the creek. So Mendona Creek is at the base of the dune field. And our family spent the rest of the day there. It's a great like water playground, and it has this phenomenon called surge flow. It's where these ripples of waves just like appear out of nowhere in the river. It's really cool. And this creek is like the one of the only places in the world where this happens. So I think that's awesome. We also like Great Sand Dunes because it's one of the few national parks that allow dogs, even on the dune fields. So our Labrador had a fabulous time at Great Sand Dunes. Dark skies here for stargazing at night. They have a lot of ranger programs that are around astronomy. And if you happen to be there on a full moon, they have these really neat ranger walks that are like the moon walks on the dunes. And we weren't there during a full moon, but I've seen pictures and they're really stunning. So while I like White Sands National Park in New Mexico, I like Great Sands better because of the addition of the water.
I mean, that's so cool because it sounds like you're gonna get kind of hot and sweaty, and then you get to swim and cool off and relax. It sounds super unique. Now, sandboarding, is that standing as you're like almost like a surfboard, and then like sand sledding, like you're sitting?
Yes, exactly. And my youngest is the type of kid that only has to try something once and then boom, he's an expert. So, like sandboarding and snowboarding, water skiing, that's all in his wheelhouse. So he really enjoyed this, picked it up super quickly. Mom, not so much. I did try. I am better at sand sledding than I am sandboarding. But it's fun. It's just fun to try something new.
So, is this one of the like overall family favorites and a real favorite for your kids because they're adventurous and outdoorsy, and it had that high adventure kind of thing going?
Yeah, I think especially for like, late elementary, early middle school, like this is a great park because of those activities that I think really interest kids.
And you're gonna wanna rent those things the day before, I guess, obviously. I mean,
Yes.
if you're saying you wanna get up really early, because obviously it gets so hot, right?
Yes, which means you're paying for a 2-day rental. But I would do that rather than going into the park, coming back out of the park, renting, going back into the park. It's not worth it. Just do the 2-day rental.
And there is I think, a very popular campground there that's RV centric to some degree, right?
Yeah, I definitely recommend staying in the park in this national park. It's called Pinion Falls or Flats, Pinion Flats. So you can take advantage of the evening ranger programs because you're staying there in the park. Know that there is a length limit in that park, 35 feet. We had a fairly large rig at the time, and I do remember that the loop around the campground was a little tight. So I would take that limit seriously.
And is that right, like, up the road from the dunes, or is it right next to the dunes, the
It's
campground?
practically right next to the dunes. Like, you can walk from the RV park to the creek and the dunes. So, we had a class A. We never move our RV at this park, and so that was great because it was super convenient.
Alright, I was really excited to see this next one on your list. Now, I've said 100 times on the RV Atlas podcast that Olympic National Park is my favorite national park, which really surprises people. But Washington State also has North Cascades National Park, which is really the
Mhm.
definition of an underrated park. I don't think a lot of people get to this one. So what did
Yeah.
why do you recommend it? What do you love about it?
So I live in Oregon, so driving to North Cascades National Park is not that difficult for me. It's located in northern Washington state along the Canadian border. And I think this park is a less busy version of Glacier National Park. And I don't say that lightly because Glacier National Park is one of my, top three favorites. The topography here is really similar to Glacier. You have those fantastic mountain views, that aquamarine alpine lake water, the meadows of wildflowers, and very similar wildlife. We did see a bear off trail here when we were visiting North Cascades. That has some really challenging hiking, just like Glacier. And if you hike high enough, just like Glacier, you'll find snow. And again, my youngest has never seen a lake that he didn't want to jump into, even when it was partially covered with ice. And that is what he did here. There are plenty of campgrounds to choose from. I will say that we really like this little town called Winthrop. It has sort of those Wild West vibes. Kind of reminds me of Medora outside Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which you just talked about a couple of weeks ago. So, highly recommend North Cascades.
And that's so interesting too that you're saying it's more akin to Glacier than to Olympic, and that totally makes sense. I mean, Olympic's on the Pacific Ocean,
Mhm.
but two amazing national parks in one state. And I'm so glad that you brought up North Cascades. Now, is Medora's maybe a little cheesy and touristy? Is Winthrop have like a cheesy touristy thing, or does it have maybe more of an authentic Western vibe?
I mean, it's touristy, but I don't wouldn't call it cheesy. I mean, it's just a really cute town with sort of the Western storefronts, wood buildings, a great coffee shop. So I think it's really enjoyable.
And about how far from Seattle is North Cascades? Like, if somebody had a, major case of wanderlust and wanted to just fly into Seattle, what kind of drive are you talking about to then get out to North Cascades?
You know, Coming from Seattle is a different direction than we went. My guess would be at least 3 hours, because you know how it is once you start getting up into mountain roads, time slows down a little bit, but it's a good 3 hours, and I should mention, Washington also has Mount Rainier National Park,
Mm,
and so,
major.
you can easily do 3 national parks in the state of Washington.
What a great trip. I mean, what a bucket list kind of trip. And I don't think people think of doing that in Washington State. Heading to Washington State to do those three. Epic,
Yeah,
epic.
you're right.
All right, we have 3 more underrated national parks from Shelley, who is an expert, like a real expert on America's national parks. But before we dive into the next 3, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Camco. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are here with Shelly Bailey Shaw, who is about to accomplish something amazing this summer. She has 2 more national parks to go, and then she can say that she has been to all 63 of America's national parks. Now, if more get added, you got to get on it.
I know.
There are rumors that the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area could become a national park, or there's people pushing for it, which doesn't mean it'll
Interesting,
happen,
okay.
but there's a movement of people that would like that to happen, and they're sort of petitioning for it, and that is how it can start. Okay, so let's go to Death Valley for
Hmm.
our third most underrated national park. Tell us why you love this one and why people should put this on their bucket lists.
Well, I know that you've covered Death Valley in depth on a previous podcast, so I won't go into great detail, but I do think this park continues to be underrated. It is surprisingly diverse and vast. We spent 2 days here on our visit, and I think everyone wished that we had had another 2 days to explore. So, some highlights for us, we enjoyed the Mosaic Canyon hike, where you kind of wind through this narrow corridor of polished rock before it just like opens up into this wide canyon. You can also hike the Mesquite Flat Sand Dunes. These are rather bizarre sand dunes. They're formed by three different types. I didn't even know there were different types of sand dunes until I went here, but there are sand dunes, linear, and star shaped. And this particular location has all three. Of course, Death Valley's claim to fame is its elevation. So at Badwater Basin, you're standing at 282 feet below sea level. That's the lowest spot in North America. And you can turn around and they have signage up on top of this hill behind, so you can see where sea level is, and so you'll be amazed at like how low you really are. You can also drive the scenic 9 mile loop called the Artist Drive. It's surrounded by these hills that have like ribbons of like dark brown and caramel. It kind of made me, it was like an ice cream sundae. I could have been hungry, but like, it's like, it looks like chocolate and caramel coming off the rocks. It's really beautiful. And if you have extra time, which unfortunately we didn't on this trip, you can head out to the mysterious racetrack. That's a dry lake bed where they have these rocks, some that are like 700 pounds in weight, and they mysteriously slide and leave these long tracks behind them. So we didn't get a chance to see that. I've seen pictures. I think it would be really cool. So lots of variety at Death Valley.
How did you do Death Valley? Did you just go and do that and that was the whole trip, or were you comboing it with other national parks in the region? Just if somebody wants to go to Death Valley, is there like a route you would recommend or other spots to hit?
Yeah, we did it on a spring break week and started in Palm Springs and then worked our way through Joshua Tree and then around to Death Valley and back.
That sounds like an amazing trip. Now, obviously, you're not saying that Joshua Tree is an underrated national park. How do they compare? Are they two totally different parks? Are there any similarities in the feel for visiting those two parks?
I think they're completely different parks. And I might be in the minority, but I think Joshua Tree is a 1 day park. Um,
Mm.
and I definitely think that Death Valley is a 2 to 3, maybe even 4 day park. So I prefer Death Valley.
Oh my gosh, that's like making a real statement there. Like I've
Yeah,
never heard
I'm
so.
throwing it down, man.
You're throwing down a claim, Death Valley better than Joshua Tree. I love that. And of course, you can do both and decide for yourself. So
And
is it
it's
is
really
it?
because of the variety, right? Like Joshua Tree is one note for me.
Mm.
It is just the landscape is very similar. There's bouldering, there's the wacky trees, but that's really that's what that park has to offer. Whereas I think Death Valley has multiple ecosystems and multiple things to see.
I know exactly what you mean by the one note. That was such a great way to put it, and it's an amazing note, I'm sure,
Yeah.
right? Like Badlands National Park, one note, 2 days max. You could
Yep.
really do, a full day in Badlands. And when I say that to people, they think that I don't like Badlands. No, like I loved Badlands. But then I say, Custer State Park could do 4 or 5 days because of that
Right.
variety. So I know exactly what you mean. Now,
Mhm.
you went in the spring. Is that the best time of year to go for obvious reasons?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Early spring or late fall are really the only time I would recommend going to Death Valley. It was warm in early spring.
Now, I don't know the exact details on this, but I believe that some of the campgrounds are even closed in the summer, because it
Yes,
gets so hot.
yes.
So spring is a good time, and that's what Lauren Eber was saying when we had her on, that kind of spring desert camping, such a wonderful time to go. Now, what about choosing a place to stay? Any tips there when you visit Death Valley?
Well, because of its size, I would suggest you stay where you play. So in other words, plot out and plan your move, how you're going to move around the park, and then stay at the closest campground or lodging accordingly. We started our stay in the central part of the park near Mosaic Canyon. So that meant we stayed at Stovepipe Wells RV Park. Frankly, it's nothing more than a gravel parking lot with hookups, but it is near those hikes. We also stayed at the ranch at Furnace Creek, which was really packed. It's a very odd RV park as far as its layout, but it does have one saving grace, and that is its large resort like pool. So, the best strategy I think in Death Valley is get up at the crack of dawn, explore the park, and then in the afternoon, retreat to the pool.
Oh my gosh, I it's just it sounds amazing. And the spring sounds like the absolute best time to go. So anything else on Death Valley that you want to mention?
I think that covers it.
And we have more resources for you. Like, so if you're listening and you want to learn more, Shelly has some cool articles that she did for kidtripster.com. So if you go to the rvatlas.com, we'll have the show notes and we'll link to those articles. And I'll also link to the episodes with Lauren Eber from a year ago on Death Valley, Joshua Tree, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's go to Carlsbad Caverns. Tell us why you think this is still a great national park, bucket list worthy, and worth a visit, and underrated.
Yeah, so Carlsbad Cavern in New Mexico is fairly well known, but I put it on this list for two reasons. One, in my opinion, it's the best cave park in the system. Better than Mammoth, better than Wind Caves, and certainly better than Great Basin. And second, it's really well run. It has a nice visitor center, a fabulous gift shop. I know you love your national park gift shops, and it has really good ranger programs. I do think my impression of this park was influenced by a really unique opportunity that we had to go into the cave with a ranger first thing in the morning and walk in pitch dark and then go around and flip on all the lights. And it just made for these wow moments when the lights came on and you saw for the very first time just how immense this cave system is. And the lighting is really well done in this particular cave system. So I really it has so many different cave features all in one place that I just think it's a really unique spot. You also need to plan your trip so that you can see all the bats exit the cave in the early evening. They have a ranger program, and you're waiting, and then all of a sudden, whoosh, all the bats come out, and it's quite a spectacle.
You're making a lot of like these awesome claims here, and you're just blowing by them, right? So Death Valley better than Joshua Tree, okay? Carlsbad
Mhm.
Caverns better than Mammoth Cave. That's a real claim.
It's true.
That's surprising.
I speak from experience. It's
You
true.
do, and but just tell me why. I believe you. I mean, why would you pick Carlsbad Caverns over Mammoth? I mean, you did mention it's really well run, and just is it the overall experience, or literally the caves are more fascinating?
I found the caves to be more fascinating because, as you know, when you go into a cave system, there are all different kinds of features beyond your stagmites and your stalactites. All the caves form in different ways, and I think Carlsbad has the best collection of those different kinds of formation. The one thing it doesn't have that Wind Cave has is the I think they call it box. I'm not going to get this right, but there's like a box-ish kind of feature that Wind Caves has that I don't think they have at Carlsbad. But I think that it was just such a spectacle, and just a really beautiful cave system and very accessible. Sometimes when you go into these caves, you're down on your knees and you're crawling, and like depending on what tour you take. I appreciated here that this cave was able to be enjoyed by everyone. There were a lot of older people here, their families with strollers here. And I like it when something is accessible to all.
Now, our topic's underrated national parks, but I just want your hot take on New Mexico because we've done a series over the years on underrated states, and we didn't do New Mexico, but I wanted to do New Mexico as an underrated state for RV travel. I mean, would you agree that this is an underrated national park, but also like the state of New Mexico is underrated, I think, for RV travel.
I agree. I really enjoy New Mexico because you not only have Carlsbad, but you have White Sands that's just really close by. We visited one after the other. And then you also have the town of Albuquerque. I have spent a week in Albuquerque, really enjoyed it. Fabulous food, great people. And there are a lot of other Native American sites in that area that I think are worth visiting. So I agree with you. I enjoy New Mexico. Again, spring and fall, probably the best time to visit.
I think it's just a location issue that it's just so far away for so many of us to get there. And I agree, Albuquerque was a great town, Route 66, and just a
Mm-hmm.
great town for food. All right,
I
let's
think
go.
that,
Go
when
ahead.
we some of these more remote places like Big Bend and in Texas and Guadalupe mountains, we did these on like cross country road trips. So like we live in Oregon, so everything is a drive. But we've gone cross country like this 3 times, and each time I pick a different route, and we hit a different sequence of national parks. So this was on a trip where we drove Oregon to Florida, and then on the way home, we took a southern route through, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, then into the desert Southwest, and then north. So,
You're making me realize that in terms of having this goal of visiting 63 national parks, which I think a lot of people do, a fair number of people do, that the RVer has a huge advantage over somebody that typically would do like a hotel vacation because you're hitting spots on the way as opposed to flying from one place to another place. And it almost really sounds to me like if you didn't do those big cross country trips, like you wouldn't even be
mm,
close to the 63 national parks. So the RV seems kind of pretty pivotal, and you've done a bunch of them not by RV, obviously, for obvious reasons,
right.
but those RV trips were the foundation. And in those, not to put you on the spot, but in those 3 cross-country RV trips, about how many of the parks did you do? It doesn't have to be exact, but how many did you knock out?
I would say that on these big trips, we would do in the neighborhood of 10.
So that's like in those 3 trips, you kinda did half of the parks to some
Yeah,
degree.
and then the other ones we would do in kind of smaller loops. So, for example, Colorado. Colorado has 3 national parks. So we took, I think it was probably 7 to 10 days, and did Colorado. Or Yellowstone. Obviously, we're going to do Yellowstone with Grand Teton. And that was a week loop. Um, but I agree with you. I'm not sure that we would have accomplished this. As well, it wasn't easy, but as easily as we did without having an RV. I can't really imagine doing this without an RV.
Was there ever a time where you were like, "Oh, crap, we gotta get to this one," and you kinda maybe didn't quite want to, or, like, it was inconvenient, but it was more like, "Alright, we're crossing this one off the list," and I would do the same thing. I don't think there's anything, phony about doing that, but I'm sure at some point it was, like, hard to get to one or it took you out of the way.
Yeah, I can think of a couple that were like that. One that immediately came to mind was Congaree National Park in South Carolina. Again, we live in Oregon. So, and Congaree never made it onto one of these sort of longer itineraries. So we took a spring break and actually flew to Charleston and stayed on Kiowa Island, and then did a day trip to Congaree. Because in my opinion, it's not worth more than a day trip. And did like a canoe paddle through the swamps of Congaree, and that's how we checked that one off the list.
I got a little sidetracked, so last question on Carlsbad Caverns before we go to Alaska, and of course, say anything you wanna say if you left anything out. No RV camping no camping inside that national park, so, like, what are your options, or how did you guys do that?
Yeah, no, we stayed at the nearest RV park, which is called White's City RV Park. It's unremarkable, but that's not why you're there. So we literally pulled in after the bats and pulled out the next morning. and spent zero time in that RV trip beyond sleeping.
And I think there's a KOA there too. There's like a couple options like that. But that sometimes
Yeah.
that's what it's going to be like when you're trying to visit a national park where the campground is not a huge part of the experience. It's just your base camp. All right, we're going to come back in a second and we're going to talk about Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. And Shelly's like going to be like an Alaska expert, for goodness sake, after this summer. But before we knock off that last park and then talk a little bit more about a few other things about national parks, we have a sponsored message from our friends at Go RVing. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are here with Shelly, and she is talking about 5 underrated national parks. She's throwing down all kinds of controversial claims and opinions about the national parks, which are completely based on her experience, having been to 61 of the 63. And she's going to knock off the last 2 this summer. Our last underrated national park is Wrangell St. Elias, and this one is huge, correct?
Yeah. And I have saved my favorite underrated park, maybe one of my top three favorite of all time national parks for last. And while this is a drop dead gorgeous Alaska park, it's really about the experience my family had here. Wrangell St. Elias is the country's largest national park. That might surprise some people. It's 13.2 million acres. So to put that in perspective, that's 6 times the size of Yellowstone. Um, Four major mountain ranges converge inside this park with 9 of the 16 highest peaks in the United States. So when I use the word grand to describe this park, I mean, it doesn't even begin to do it justice.
Is it also, and this is a strange question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is it intimidating almost? Is it almost like a little frightening to be in this kind of wilderness?
Yeah, it definitely is remote with limited services, and the Park Service has divided it up into 4 areas. And so there, of course, there is no way you can explore all corners of this park. So we focused on the central section and the small towns of McCarthy and Kennecott. And this is where I have to admit that I wouldn't visit this park by RV. You actually can't get to where I'm telling you to go by RV. It's a 7-hour drive from Anchorage, and the last 60 miles of this journey are is on this like teeth chattering gravel road where you can't go faster than 35 miles an hour. The road ends at a footbridge where you park your car, you cross the footbridge, and then you board a shuttle the last couple of miles to Kennecott Glacier Lodge. And so that's where I recommend people stay.
Now, I want to hear about this lodge, but I just want to throw this in there. We've never been didactic on the RV Atlas podcast about saying you got to go everywhere by RV. And,
Mhm.
it's my first choice. It's my favorite way to travel. But I do like to say to our listeners, sometimes it can be fun to do a national park lodge or to fly to a location and stay in a cabin. And different trips are going to require different things and have different options that are really really fun. So I'm thrilled to hear about this lodge. Now, this is actually a national park lodge, right? Or is
It's
it like a concessionaire
privately
run?
owned.
Oh, it is privately
Yeah.
owned. Okay. So tell us about it.
Um, so it's one of the most well-located lodges in all of the national parks. It overlooks 25 miles of glacier and is surrounded by 14 of the highest mountain peaks on the continent. I mean, when I say the views are just absolutely stunning. The lodge consists of 2 main buildings. So you have the main lodge and then the south wing. And the main lodge is the original structure. It houses the lobby and the restaurant and 24 guest rooms. Nearly every inch of this place is covered in memorabilia from the copper mining days, which it was really interesting. It's also important to know, though, that the rooms here are smaller and they don't have any ensuite bathrooms. So there are 7 bathrooms and 6 shower rooms that are shared. For that reason, I strongly suggest you stay in the other building, which is the more modern south wing, which has larger rooms and ensuite bathrooms. And the majority of the guests here opt for a meal plan, so like a 3 meals a day plan. Dinner is served family style, and again, for obvious reasons, right? You are remote, like there are no restaurants around the corner, so it's very much kind of like a European feel to it, where you go to a lodge and then you're sharing a meal with the other people who are staying there.
Was the food good?
The food was good. It was good.
Right, so what are some of, like, the other, the awesome things that you did while you were there? And then if you wanna throw in anything else about the lodge, please do.
Yeah. Well, on the first day, we toured the copper mine, which for the most part is still intact. That's how this area all came to be, right? It has a very interesting history. But on the second day, our family booked a trip with St. Elias Alpine Guides to go ice climbing. And I have to say, this is probably, well, it is the most memorable experience we've ever had in a national park. I would say it's probably one of our most memorable travel experiences, period. It's physically demanding. You walk 9 miles, 5 of those miles are like in heavy climbing boots with crampons, and you're carrying gear. Mind you, our guide was this 20 something superhuman who was carrying an 80-pound pack. So, like, you can't complain because he's carrying a lot more gear than you are. So, you hike from the lodge to Root Glacier and then across this moraine to your first climbing site. And it's a very impressive, like 100 foot ice face. And you get a lesson, you grab your ice tools, and then you climb on. So it's like one of these with the ice picks. And it's an adventure. And then after our second climb, our boys did something that my husband and I refused to do. They jumped into one of those like sapphire blue glacial pools. You probably have seen pictures of them. The temperature was about 28 degrees in the water. I have never seen my boys scramble out of water so quickly. Yeah. Again, I'm not doing it. They did it. It was an experience.
On a scale of 1 to 10, though, like, your family is pretty close to a 10 on the adventurous scale, and also, I think, you have pretty athletic kids from what I understand, right?
There are a few things that we won't try. That is true.
There are a few things that you won't try. Yeah, it seems
No,
like
well,
you
there
put
are like very few. Like the only thing that I would say that I put like a hard stop to is bungee jumping. We haven't been bungee jumping, but we've done a lot of things that one might question my parenting. I guess I don't know. I allow my
Oh,
kids
you
to do
you
quite a
no,
few things.
you're doing it exactly right. You've raised adventurous kids. So what anything else, like any other great things that you did, or what else do we wanna say about visiting here?
Yeah, so like on the return trip as we're hiking back, the boys scrambled down with a guide on this like sheer cliff, right, to explore an ice cave that's here. And they reported back that it was really cool. I saw the pictures, but at that point, my husband and I were spent. Like we had reached our physical capabilities, so they had that adventure on their own. And then there's also a nearby town called McCarthy. And this town is sort of legendary in Alaska. We happened to be there on July 4th, which just was really good timing. So they have this annual parade in McCarthy, which is so Alaskan. It runs through the town, which is all of like 6 blocks maybe. And half the town participates in the parade while the other half spectates. And then they go around the corner, and then these two groups switch. And so that the other half participates in the parade while the other half is spectating. And it was like the whole thing was just so homespun and
It's so Alaska.
quirky, so Alaska. I mean, I still chuckle like when I think of celebrating July 4th in McCarthy.
Is Alaska one of your favorite states?
I love Alaska. I kind of have a thing about polar regions. I love the Lapland and Finland. I've loved visiting Antarctica, and I love Alaska.
Alright, anything else on Wrangell St. Elias before we sort of wrap up? I have a couple kind of bigger, broader questions for you about national parks.
Just like my strongest recommendation. I just think this park is something, and nobody knows about it, and it's the largest, and I just think that it's a spectacular place.
So, kind of, pivoting and just wrapping things up and going big picture for a minute. If you've inspired somebody out there listening to try and make this a goal, to visit all 63 national parks, which what a great life goal. You did give some tips along the way, but any other tips for somebody who might be, sitting there at age 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever age it is, right? Because we talked about Grandma Joy's road trip, and how she completed this as well. Forget the age, just for anybody that wants to do this in terms of planning or making it happen. Any big tips?
Well, I would say that you don't have to visit all 63 to have a goal. Like, some of these parks are admittedly very difficult and can be very expensive to get to. So, America Samoa, which we went to just recently, that's an expensive trip. That's a flight to Hawaii. For us, that's a 6 hour flight to Hawaii, and then another 6 hours on to America Samoa, and that's going to be cost prohibitive for some people. I'm not going to lie about that, but that doesn't mean you can't still try to get to as many as possible. One thing that we did is we had a smaller class A at the beginning of our RV journey, and then we upgraded to a larger class A. And before we did the upgrade, we did some research and figured out what all the length limitations were in the park. And so we made sure that we visited all those smaller length requirement parks while we had the smaller RV.
That's
And
very
then when we
smart.
made the yeah, and then when we made the jump, because we don't tow, and I think you and I have had conversations before. Like, we're one of those few Class A folks who do not tow. I don't like to tow, and so we have made this work with the rig we have, and so doing a little pre planning like that helped.
Even I love that as a tip, and even maybe starting to think through, well, these are the ones I'll take my RV to. These are maybe I'll fly here. Maybe I'll stay in a national park lodge here. Maybe I have a friend that lives near this
Hmm.
one. Strategizing that way, and I also really do love the idea of maybe your goal doesn't have to be to visit all 63, but maybe your goal is like, "Look, I want to get to 10 and then go from there. I want to go to 10 national parks, or I want to do all the national parks on the West Coast." Whatever that is, those smaller goals can then lead to the larger goals as well. So,
Hmm.
now with all of this national park experience, what makes a great national park to you? What are the absolute essential qualities to make a national park excellent and wonderful? Because you're not afraid to say when you don't like one.
Yes, there is a very short list of parks that I put in the category of not worth your time, but still went to because we had this particular goal. What makes a national park? I've actually a great national park. I've actually thought about this question a lot, and I would say that first, it's stunning beauty. I'm a photographer. I love drop dead gorgeous scenery, and so I want to be someplace that's beautiful. Second, I would say are unique land features. The park needs to be distinctive for me and look like no other place in the world. And so many of our national parks are otherworldly, right? Um, and third, I think this has probably come through. This is a big one for our family. There's got to be something special for us to do. My sons are adventure junkies, and we're always looking to like one up the last adventure. So if it's ice climbing and Wrangell St. Elias, then we're there. We're going to do that, and those are the kinds of experiences that just add to our national park journey.
I think that last one's super important for everyone listening that has kids. I could go to a national park and hike every day, and that's for Max and Theo and Wes that will become a drag at a certain
Hmm.
point. where if there are those other special adventures, whether it's whitewater rafting or the ice climbing or whatever it might be, I think that's very important if you're traveling with kids. My last question for you, Shelley, is at some point this summer, you're going to finish the 63 national parks. I guess this is maybe a two-parted question. Which one then are you going to go back to for? Is there
Mm.
one that's like, oh my God, I got to get back here? Or is it gonna be more like, "Let's go to Disney World," and just, like, not do like or just what a resort or, like, "Let's go to Cancun," or okay, I did national parks, like, give me cocktails on the beach. You're such a experienced world traveler, then what's next after a goal like this? Don't just sit home and watch TV.
No, no, I would never do that because I really enjoy traveling. And I think that having been in the business I have as far as a travel writer and editor, I've been really fortunate to go to a lot of places outside the country, but it's a really big world. And so I have kind of a short list of places that we would like to get to internationally in the next 5 months or 5 years. But I will say, there was a recent news article about our grandma friend who is 93 and completed her national park quest with her grandson. And it kind of made me think, like, would I do this all over again, maybe with my grandkids? Like, I
Wow.
started I started to think about I'm not sure I can convince my husband to do it, but, I kind of that idea really sort of appeals to me, like, going back to at least a lot of these
Oh
parks,
my God, that's such a
when I have
that'd
grandkids.
be amazing. I've always said that for Stephanie and I, the second trip to a place is almost every single time it is better. And people don't believe me. And people, oh, you went there. Why do you want to go back? I think that if we go back to Yellowstone, it'll be better. I think if we
Mm.
go back to Glacier, it'll be better because you can hone in more precisely on what you liked, what you didn't like, revisit places that gave you great joy, and cross off some of the things you didn't do. So that is an amazing, amazing idea.
Well, and what I think is important about what you just said is that the first time you go, you have to hit all the musts, right? Like you're going to Yellowstone, so you have to go to Old Faithful. You have to, there's this checklist of things that you have to go to. The second time, you can go to all the places nobody goes to, because you've been to the must sees. And in my experience, the places that people are less likely to be are sometimes the best places, because you're experiencing them without the crowds, without the hustle bustle, without some of the commercialization that can happen in our national parks. So I'm with you. I think that there's nothing wrong with a second visit to some place spectacular.
Well, that what a great way to end this episode. Thank you so, so much for such a wonderful episode and for all the great content over the years. Where can we find you, follow you, find some of your other work if people want more of Shelley?
Yeah, please follow at Kid Tripster, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We post trips there and then content online at kidtripster.com.
And we will have you back in, I guess, like the August timeframe. Does that make sense?
I think I'll have recovered by then, so I think we're good.
Okay. Shelley, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the RV Atlas.
To find out more about the topics discussed on this show, head on over to thervatlas.com.
And to join the friendliest group of RVers, head on over to the RV Atlas group on Facebook and make sure to join us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at the RV Atlas.
If you enjoy our show, please consider leaving us a review over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
And we will see you at the campground.
See you at the campground.